our dear friend, our brother, Scott Ritter is here with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Scott, let's start with what has happened in the last 48 hours. It was something similar to what has happened before the ceasefire. We had the operation in the southern part of Isfahan, then Donald Trump coming out and suddenly saying 2 weeks of ceasefire. And we had the Operation Freedom. And then later on, Donald Trump is talking about a new framework published by Axios, which was somehow Iranian part saying that and they don't agree with this document that Axios has, published. What is happening right now? What is your understanding? On one part, many people in Iran believe that the war is coming and they're preparing for a major war. On the other hand, you see these sort of negotiation talks that Donald Trump is trying to point out. Your understanding of what's going on? What are we going to see?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's only prudent to prepare for war when the United States has been, reinforcing its depleted position. I think people need to understand that. There's a reason why we're not at war right now, Neiman. You know the reason. Iran won. It was the United States that was compelled to seek a ceasefire after the humiliation it suffered outside Isfahan, the recognition that we had no recourse. We were done. We had shot our bolt. There was nothing left. We were unable to prevent Iran from continuing to launch ballistic missiles. They were having great effect against the United States and its regional allies. The regime was stronger than ever. We had no ability to impact the Strait of Hormuz. Iran had solid control of this. And we had depleted our arsenal. The long-range strike weapons that we used, the standoff weapons, were gone in order to continue to sustain, militarily viable pressure on Iran. We had to put our aircraft in harm's way. And contrary to the overly optimistic pronouncements of Pete Hegseth and others, the Iranian air defense wasn't destroyed. It was alive and well and living, and it shot down American aircraft and damaged others. And, Trump was compelled to acknowledge reality. Now, he acknowledges reality in a way that only Donald Trump can, by being unrealistic. But that's why we sought a ceasefire. For whatever reason, Donald Trump opted not to declare victory and walk away at that time. Instead, he undertook a posture that, was designed to create the impression that Iran had lost the war. But Iran hadn't lost the war. The fact of the matter is that today, if the United States were to resume kinetic operations, as Pete Hegseth and company like to say, I can't speak on behalf of the Iranian government, and I'd be loath to even try, but reading what they've said, and the implication is that the United Arab Emirates will cease to exist as a modern nation state, that the totality of its energy production capacity will be destroyed. Whether or not Iran goes for the true kill and takes out desalination plants and causes Abu Dhabi and Dubai to depopulate along with the rest of the United Arab Emirates, that's who knows. It's what I would do. But then again, I'm a bloodthirsty warmonger. So, in comparison to the Iranians, who have actually been very responsible in their application of force, too responsible in some minds, given what has been done to them, I think we should remind your audience that they were subjected to perfidy, a surprise attack at a time when the United States was claiming to be seeking a diplomatic solution. Israel and the United States carried out a surprise attack, not designed to take away military capacity, but to destroy a nation state, to eliminate a regime, murdering people. There's no reason for Iran to ever trust the United States again, nor should it. And that's why Iran must prepare for the worst possible outcomes. But if we're realistic about this, the same conditions that compelled Donald Trump to seek a ceasefire at 39 days into his regime change operation exist today. The United States has proven that it has zero capacity to impact the Strait of Hormuz. Operation Freedom is a humiliation to the United States. Unspoken in this is the strange war that the United States had with itself and civilian fishing boats and in the United Arab Emirates. where we unleashed lethality against innocents, thinking that they were Iranian speedboats when they weren't. We launched missiles that apparently struck UAE oil facilities, doing damage. The UAE was engaged in an intramural firefight with Phantoms, firing their air defense systems off, shooting down nothing, when the Iranians are sitting there going, what's going on? And then the United States retreated. So, we lost a battle we fought against ourselves. I think everybody should understand that. Now, Iran made the point very clear that it has the ability to lethally intervene in the Gulf. It hit a number of ships and made it clear that it would continue to do so. It has total control of the Gulf. I don't know what fictional escort activity the United States undertook, but I would imagine that it's as imaginary as the war that we fought against ourselves. This is it's embarrassing to be an American today when we talk about, where we are. The United States should never allow itself to be in this position. We're led by literal madmen. The president is certifiably insane. He is a man who suffers from narcissistic personality disorder of the most malignant nature. We don't have a constitutional republic. We have a cult of personality in Washington, D.C., and we are surrounded by people who don't have an oath to the Constitution or to the nation, but to an individual. And Pete Hegseth is emblematic of this. He's the epitome of this. He sat there yesterday and with a straight face and said that the Strait of Hormuz is covered by a red, white, and blue umbrella. How's that looking today, Pete? It's not existent. Marco Rubio had to admit, hey, we sort of just sunk a bunch of civilian ships because we really didn't know what we were doing. What does that mean? It means the United States Navy was panicked, was scared, frightened of Phantoms. This is not, we're supposed to be a superpower. If we send our force in, we go in decisively. I don't know what we're doing. We live in this imaginary world right now, and that's what's happening. So I don't believe we're going to attack Iran because we can't. We don't have anything to attack them with. Look at the hype that's going on. We're sending Dark Eagle. As if the Iranians instantly pooped their Depends diapers they've been wearing since this war began, because, they're so scared and they pee themselves with fear. And now the United States says we're going to send in the Dark Eagle. And the Iranians obviously are ready to surrender now. And they're ready to sign a one-page document that doesn't exist. The Dark Eagle is a fantasy. It doesn't, did we produce 8 missiles we call Dark Eagle? Yeah, we did. At $41 million each, and they don't work. We don't know how lethal they are. We know they can take off and we know that they can land, but we don't know what they do when they land because we've never really tested against a hardened target. We don't know what the lethality of these things are. And yet by deploying this, we're sending a signal to the Iranians that we can reach out and touch your ballistic missile capability. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that the Iranians, according to us, withdrew their ballistic missile capability beyond the range of the existing precision strike munitions that we have, which we've used all of, and we don't have any more left. And so we have to bring in Dark Eagle, 8 missiles that don't work. That's sort of that captures the totality of the American reality today. We have a military that's very expensive, that looks good on paper, but doesn't work. The Iranians, on the other hand, have a military that does work. And they've let it be known that if you strike us, we're striking back decisively. Now, some nations take this seriously. Bahrain declared a state of emergency. Kuwait is in a panic because they know that if Iran decides to hit the off switch, they're dead. They're done. The Qatar is sitting there going, we're trying to be friends with you, Iran. Please don't strike us. But, oh, gosh, you let that American base happen, and we still don't know where you stand with the United States, and you're signing your name to stupidity in the Security Council. It's time for the Gulf Arab states to recognize there are good guys and bad guys in this fight, and they're on the side of the bad guys. That's just the way it is. They sided with Israel. They sided with Israel. I'll say that one more time. They sided with Israel. The Gulf Arab states sided with Israel, a nation that has committed genocide against the Palestinians and is currently attacking a fellow Islamic nation. Now, I know the Iranians are Shia and the Gulf Arab states are predominantly Sunni, and there's history there, but they're literally lining up with greater Zionists who believe in, Zionists who believe in greater Israel. And, the term that is often being used in Israel when they speak of greater Israel is living room. You know what the Germanification of living room is? Lebensraum. And you know why that matters? Because Lebensraum was a Nazi policy linked to Plan Ost, Plan East, which was actually implemented in Belarus. Millions of people were killed. It was designed to commit genocide against Slavic peoples to create living room for the Aryan race. Fortunately, the war ended, the Nazis lost, but, millions of Slavs lost their lives. More than the Nazis killed Jews, by the way. People don't talk about the Holocaust of the Slavs that took place. This is why Victory Day is such a big parade that's going to happen maybe on May 8th. It's a big deal because the Soviet Union, the Slavic people, were marked for extermination by Nazi Germany. And they single-handedly, almost all by themselves, defeated the scourge because they had no other choice. But this is what Israel is. And so the Islamic world doesn't understand that they have no choice but to eradicate Israel. Israel is a scourge on humanity. It's the most evil nation in existence today. Close second is the United States. And yet they're siding, the Gulf Arab states are siding with Israel, siding with the United States as we carried out a war of aggression with no legitimacy whatsoever. And we lost. And that's the final answer. We lost and we can't win. Donald Trump can say what he wants about, we're going to resume with even greater lethality. With what, Donnie? With what? What weapons are you going to bring to bear that you haven't brought to bear? You don't have any weapons left. They're all gone. All the precision strike munitions gone. Yes, you've stripped the world dry of your missile interceptors, but Iran will drain those in 2 or 3 days of missile launch activity. And Iran has a lot of missiles, a lot more missiles than you have missile interceptors. And at the end of the day, you're going to run back into the same equation. You have no defenses against some of the most sophisticated offensive strike capacity in the world today, Iran's ballistic missile program, and the Iranians will destroy everything. And the notion that the United States is going to do lethal harm to Iran, that's not a guarantee. We don't know the precise details, but based upon what I'm seeing out of Iran, we blew up a bunch of empty buildings. And the Iranians are in the process of rebuilding these empty buildings. That's what they do. But the stuff that was in the empty buildings wasn't when they were destroyed. And they still exist. The notion that we've done lethal harm to Iran is absurd in the extreme. Ballistic missile production capacity, by the way, I think has increased during this period of time than it was in the lead up, because Iran took all the stuff that was outside in Parchin and put it underground. It's sort of like what we did to the Germans when we tried to take out their Messerschmitt fighter capacity by bombing ball bearing plants and other things. All we did is drive production underground. In 1944, at the height of the bombing, the Germans were producing more Messerschmitt fighters at any time. Iran today is producing more missiles at any time. We haven't interdicted anything. We haven't stopped anything. This is a reality. So, Trump can sit there and throw words around. Pete Hegseth can sit there and throw words around, but the reality is known to Iran, which is the most important party to know, because they know it's all BS. They know that everything in the United States is just absurd, and that empowers them to be aggressive. If there was any hesitancy on the part of Iran, that would mean that maybe the United States is onto something, but there's no hesitancy. They're not doing. Now, would they like to see, the pressure Iran's getting isn't from the United States. It's from Russia and it's from China, especially China. China's paying a big economic price. But China also recognizes the absolute necessity not to yield to American pressure. But, so the Chinese and the Russians are looking for compromises that will not weaken Iran. I think the big Russian compromise that I think would be part of a plan is to remove the 60% enriched uranium from Iran. Now, I know a lot of Iranians said that will never happen. I say it will happen because it has to happen. It's the logical thing to happen. It keeps it out of the American hand, which is a defeat when the United States says we will have it. We won't. I think they're talking about, freezing your enrichment for a period of time. That only makes sense because it's going to take Iran some time to rebuild infrastructure, and the Russians will step in and provide the fuel for Iran's nuclear program and build it up. And it also will create the opportunity for the United States to undergo 12 to 15 years of internal domestic transformation away from the aggressive, hyper stupid nation that we are into maybe a more realistic nation. Donald Trump will be dead and in the ground when the enrichment freeze is over. He's not going to live that much longer. And all the people that are around him will be old, toothless, and irrelevant. There will be a new group of people that have to deal with a multipolarity reality. And I think at that point in time, people will say it only makes sense for Iran to have what is permitted under Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so I think this is a path that Iran can accept. I mean, again, I can't speak for the Iranians, but I think that's the solution. Strait of Hormuz, I think there's a solution there between Iran and Oman. We keep calling it an international waterway, but I guess actually, if you look at international law strictly, it's not an international waterway. It's a waterway that Iran and Oman control. Whether Iran is going to be charging tolls or not, this is negotiable. But what isn't negotiable is Iran's de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz. So there will be an exchange there. The weak part of this deal, of course, is what America is obligated to do. Iran wants instant lifting of sanctions. The United States talking about a very gradual. The second you hear the word gradual out of the United States' mouth, it means we're not going to do it. We're never going to do it because we hold them to artificial standards and we never comply. Our goal is to drag this thing out and give the Iranians just enough to make them say, we don't want to go back to the war. I think at this point in time, Iran's like, bring it on. Bring it on. We're not playing your stupid game. And the United States is going to have to make some concessions there. Trump has a meeting with Xi Jinping coming up, maybe. We may see some movement there. A lot of conversations taking place between Russia and the United States. Earlier, we had talked about the potential of a grand bargain. I think that's what we're seeing right now, is the United States and Russia working out some sort of grand bargain that brings Ukraine and Iranian conflict resolution to a head. We can talk about Ukraine later if you want to. I think Ukraine's about to die a very violent death, well-deserved violent death. I pray that Ukraine does fire drones against Russia on May 9th. I pray they do, because that will compel Russia to do what needed to be done more than a year ago, to physically terminate the Zelensky regime and everything about it, to destroy Ukraine as a modern nation state, screw that country. They've had opportunities for peace. And also, I do think at the same time to strike Europe. I think Europe's going to be hit by Russian forces. I think Europe deserves to be hit. I think when you provide a corridor, and it's no longer debatable. One of those Ukrainian drones hit a Latvian apartment building or an Estonian apartment building, blowing a hole in it, fire, and everybody's supposed to don't talk about this. Why? It's a Ukrainian drone flying over your territory to strike your strategic targets in the vicinity of St. Petersburg. This isn't going to last. In less than a month, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is assembling, the largest forum of its type in the world. And you think Russia's going to sit there and say, yeah, we're inviting everybody in the world to come in so Ukraine can hit us with drones? It ain't going to happen. This is coming to a head. Everything's coming to a head. And, it's going to be violent, but Europe's got nothing. Europe's like the United States. All words, no substance. Or as they say in Texas, all hat, no cattle.
Yeah. Scott, you mentioned all the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian nuclear program, I think, but the first step on the part of Iranian is to end war permanently on all fronts. Right after that, they're talking about the Strait of Hormuz in Iran.
Never going to happen.
How is that going to play out for the whole region, do you think? Because Israel is somehow attacking the southern part of Lebanon. The attacks are happening as we talk.
I just think that it's just like it's wishful thinking for the United States to say that we're going to get total control of the Iranian nuclear program. It's wishful thinking for Iran to think that a peace plan is going to involve the region. It's not. The Israeli-Hezbollah problem is a unique problem to Israel and Hezbollah that requires Israel to physically withdraw from Lebanon. This means that Hezbollah is going to have to continue to kick their ass. People forget that Hezbollah beat the Israelis once, straight up, caused them to leave Lebanon. And then they fought them to a standstill in 2008, or was it 2006, I think. And right now they're beating Israel. Hezbollah is supposed to be defeated, non-existent, not there. The Israeli troops on the ground are getting slaughtered every day. They can't advance anymore. And there's no solution to this. So, while there may be some sort of quasi ceasefire in place, I think if the Iranians insist on resolving the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict, it's just a non-starter. It's just like it's the equivalent of the United States asking for Iran to give up all of its nuclear. It isn't. You have to physically destroy Israel to make that happen. I don't know if Iran's ready to go that level right now. The Iranians are strategic thinkers. I mean, they've proven that. They've shown great foresight in not pursuing a nuclear weapon. I just want to remind all the people who are out there say this proves Iran needs a nuclear weapon. No, it doesn't. It proves the exact opposite. Iran, without nuclear weapons, defeated two nuclear-armed powers, the United States and Israel. And Iran knows that if it acquired a nuclear weapon, that would change the dynamic 100%. The first thing it would do is legitimize everything that's been said about Iran. And then you lose all the political support that Iran's been gaining, because right now Iran is identified as the victim. If Iran decides to have a nuclear weapon, Iran will no longer be the victim, but the perpetrator. It doesn't matter how you can justify it. I'm just telling you what the facts are. But Iran doesn't want it. I heard it straight from the president's mouth. I heard it from the foreign minister's mouth. They didn't get killed. They're alive today, and they still don't want it. And I don't think the son is going to contradict the father when it comes to the supreme leader. So, he's not going to turn around and say, well, suddenly my father's religious genius, the two fatwas he issued, no, they're bullshit. We're going to have nukes. He's not going to do that. So Iran's doesn't want nuclear weapons. I know there's hardliners in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command that say things. They've always said things, but they're not the decision makers. They don't make the final decision. And Iran's not going to acquire nuclear weapons. And, there will be a compromise on the nuclear side of it. So that's the genius of Iran. They think long distance. And right now, I think with the potential, I think Iran has to be prepared to strike back hard. I mean, if deterrence doesn't work unless people believe that you're going to do it. So, if they do strike, Iran needs to eliminate the United Arab Emirates, totally, 100% gone. And then it's proof that we're a power that can kill nation states. Who wants to die next? And that's deterrence in its own right. Picking on the United Arab Emirates is pretty good because they're an extension of Israel. We now know that Israeli troops were fighting on UAE soil. Israeli troops brought the Iron Dome to the United Arab Emirates, boots on the ground. Why isn't the Muslim world in an uproar over this? That's what I don't understand. Where's Saudi Arabia? Where's Qatar? Where's Kuwait? Where's Bahrain? Where's everybody telling the United Arab Emirates, you are now the leper. We reject you. We drive you out. But they're quiet about it. They're silent about it. But it's a humiliation to the Muslim world to have Israel, which despises the Muslim world, despises the Gulf Arab states, is seeking greater Israel, out there deploying troops on an Arab country's soil. Shocking. But I think the Iranians are capable of understanding that the future solution, and this is where the Chinese and to a lesser extent the Russians come in, is economic. That the economic liberation of Iran will be the victory, the ultimate victory. Strait of Hormuz is essential for this because it is their oil nuclear bomb, meaning if you ever mess us again, we just do it. We just choke you. They will retain great connectivity with the Houthi, who can choke the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So there's dual choke points. It's the end of the West. They've already proven that. And that's the ultimate deterrence because they've proven what they can do. And we've proven we can't do anything about it. So that's what I think deters future conflict. There is no military solution. For the United States to strike Iran would be because of political impetus. And when you're dealing with a mentally ill narcissist, which we have a mentally ill man in the White House, anything's possible. But hopefully surrounded by enough people to say, we can't win this war and the consequences will be fatal to our allies in the Gulf Arab region and also will cause a global depression, especially to us in the United States. And then you have to think about your political legacy and what your future is going to be. And the fact is, you may not just get impeached, but you might get convicted, and that's the end of your family. Hopefully, people are saying this, and the addled brain of this insane man recognizes that he's staring, his future before his eyes. He needs to walk away from this war, and Iran has to, without compromising fundamental things. Iran needs to allow him to walk away from this war. And I think that's the message that Russia's sending, that China's sending.
Scott, what was the achievement of Benjamin Netanyahu with this war against Iran? Because we've learned from multiple reports recently about the bases, the US bases in GCC countries. And just yesterday, we had the Washington Post article about how extensively they were hit by Iranian missiles and Iranian drones. And I would say this is not about the United States, it's about Israel, because what has happened in GCC countries directly influenced in this situation with the interceptors, with the air defense system of Israel. And how is Israel today? Because it's I would say, the achievement of Benjamin Netanyahu's administration, because they wanted this war for such a long time. What was the outcome for Israel?
Strategic defeat. I mean, what did they accomplish? Nothing. Literally nothing. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Given the fact that Iran's nuclear program, the weaponization of their nuclear program, exists in the minds of the Israelis only. All they've done in initiating the conflict designed to terminate forever Iran's nuclear potential is create the seeds of future fantasies. Because now the Israelis, because they project themselves onto others, they say, well, we went after them. There's that old saying, if you're going to strike the king, kill the king. They struck Iran, but they didn't kill Iran. And now Iran's there. And this war will end with less than a total eradication of Iran's nuclear program, which means in the fantasy-driven minds of the Israelis, Iran not just retains the capacity to produce a nuclear weapon, but now the motivation, the justification because of what Israel did. And so this is going to drive people like Netanyahu insane. It also is going to create a politically unsustainable position because he's going to be exposed. This was his last gambit. This is why the Israelis are holding on, because it's now turned out that he's defeated nobody. He started out with October 7th. They still haven't had that full investigation. When they do, Benjamin Netanyahu's political career is over, because it'll become apparent that, his failures as a leader helped create the potential for October 7th to happen. As he fought the Hamas, as Hamas fought him to a standstill, he had to, expand the war to justify staying in power. And so he went to war against Hezbollah. And he killed Hassan Nasrallah and, had the pagers blow up, and, he was going to win there. Then he expanded the conflict into Syria. But this wasn't enough, because no matter what he did, he didn't solve any of these problems. He still had, the same domestic political problems that he faced, totally unpopular with the people of Israel. Remember, this is a guy that even before October 7th had hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets demanding his resignation, because he was seeking to alter fundamental law in Israel so that he was above the law. He couldn't be prosecuted for the corruption charges he's currently being prosecuted with right now. He's like a Ponzi scheme. In order to stay in power, he had to keep expanding. But it was all a lie, because he was never going to achieve any victory. The final straw was, of course, Iran. Now, for Iran to be possible, the United States had to be a part of it. Israel would never have attacked Iran to the scope and scale they did without American involvement. And he just happened to have an insane sucker in Washington, D.C. that listened to his garbage and agreed to this. But it failed. There's nowhere else Netanyahu can go with this. Nowhere else. So you're looking at the political collapse of Netanyahu, inevitably. He cannot survive this. The truth will come out about the damage that has been done. Just don't pretend you live in a world where Iran took out the totality of American military infrastructure in the Gulf Arab states and did no damage to the Israelis. The same weapons that took out the American bases did damage, and Israel's hiding this. But significant damage has been done to Israel. The Israeli military knows this. Now they're trapped in a forever war in Lebanon. Hezbollah, who they thought they had defeated, isn't defeated. And Gaza could blow up again. Syria is out of control. And now, what Netanyahu's done is created a new Iranian threat in the form of Turkey, where they're saying, well, we have to expand this. Turkey's a NATO member. And Israel's talking about the potential of armed conflict against Turkey. It's over. And so from the Iranian perspective, this is one of those situations, just wait. And the problem will resolve itself. Israel's on the fast track to national insolvency. Their economy is trash. That's why they needed the Abrams Accord. And their biggest partner in the Abrams Accord, United Arab Emirates, is going bankrupt as we speak. Acts of desperation, calling in $3.5 billion loan they gave to the Pakistanis, evicting 15,000 Pakistanis and stealing their money in the process. Withdrawing from OPEC so they can flood the market with their oil, but they can't because the Strait of Hormuz is closed to them. So, Israel is collapsing. The whole scheme of Greater Israel is collapsing. The best thing the Iranians could do is just let it collapse. Sometimes just get out of the way and let things happen. And that's why I think that you're not going to see a comprehensive regional peace plan, because it's impossible. Israel right now is. I mean, look at the Iranians. If we had this conversation, I don't know, in April of last year, and we said Iran was going to destroy everything and do all this, we'd both be like,
exactly.
Maybe escalation management, maybe, but I mean, the Iranian government doesn't do decisive stuff like this. Well, they did. Why? Because it's a battle of existential proportions. They have no choice. They were given no options. Trust me, had they been given options, I believe they would have taken those options. History shows this. But they had no options, so they struck into. Israel's in a similar boat right now. Israel's facing a struggle of existential proportions. And the last thing you want to do is try and back a nation that's facing such a struggle into a corner where they have no options. All right? Let Israel die. Let them die, because that's what's happening. They're dying. Let them die. That would be my advice. But but I just don't see. If Iran forces this issue, I don't see Israel yielding, because we're talking about, again, another narcissist, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's looking at his political legacy and looking at dying in jail. So it's very personal to him. Why force the issue? Why force his hand? Why compel him to do something irrational? Right now he's containable. He's trapped in a war that he can't win in Lebanon. And he has political problems at home. Don't give him an opportunity to become the martyr. So that's why I think it isn't. We're not going to be seeing decisive moves against Israel. Israel lost this war. They lost it. It was a big gamble on his part. And that's why Israelis are mad at the United States, because they know that if the United States is seeking to withdraw, that's the end of the gambit. They can't win without the United States.
I think that's the main concern right now, because an Israeli official or source told CNN that the United States is seriously considering removing sanctions on Iran, and Israel is concerned about it.
We have no choice. I love that. They're seriously. It's one of the demands that Iran's put down for conflict termination. Iran's not walking away with sanctions in place. That's not going to. And remember, it's not like, Scott Bessent sitting there in his little desk going, sanction them, and there's no repercussions to America. Iran's got the world by the throat, choking the world off. So the United States can't sit there and say, well, we're going to delay. We have to make a decision. We have to make a decision soon. And so, this is where I think Iran, has. I love that meme they put out. Donald Trump, America's holding all the cards. And so the Iranians showed Donald Trump had a handful of, but it's Uno cards, where holding the cards is a bad thing. And the Iranians are sitting there with a smaller hand with all the good cards going, yeah. But that's the truth. The Iranians have the advantage here. We proved Operation Freedom can't do anything. Do you understand how humiliating it is that we went to war against ourselves? That means we panicked. It means we have no impact. We have no ability to project power in there. The red, white, and blue shield that we put over the Strait of Hormuz was fictional, just like everything else we do is fictional. So the United States is going to lift sanctions. And I think that's one of the things the Russians are telling them, the Chinese are telling them, that there can be no peace without the lifting of sanctions. Now, the United States is going to, we always play stupid games. And so we'll say, well, there are certain sanctions that are in play that are linked to, terrorism. And if Iran continues to support Hezbollah and the Houthi, then they're supporting terrorist entities, and therefore these sanctions will stay in place. That's a bold statement to make while you're being choked off. So we'll see how long that lasts. I have a feeling that the Russians and the Chinese are saying, no, it must be comprehensive, that all laws, all, it's going to be tough for the United States, but at a minimum, all international sanctions, United Nations sanctions, have to be lifted, and the United States needs to lift sanctions that are attached to the nuclear program, ballistic missiles. The terrorism aspect of it, you need congressional consent. And so here we have an issue right now because a lot of Republicans aren't inclined to support, the total lifting of sanctions. And even if they were, the Democrats could drag this thing out until November, and then, we have a different reality. So that's one of the areas I think Iran is going to have to be frustrated with, because there's certain political realities at play that aren't conducive to the total lifting of sanctions, no matter how justified that is. You've got to be realistic. But the most important thing is the lifting of international sanctions. China's already shown that American secondary sanctions no longer frighten anybody. They've just told the United States, pound sand. If you sanction us, we sanction you back, and it's total economic war, and you can't win. And that's the truth. So Iran, I think gets by having international sanctions lifted, then diving into the SCO, diving into BRICS, and just hugging them so tight that the United States will never be able to separate them with any domestic legislation, and the Russians and Chinese will never again allow the United Nations to impose Security Council mandated sanctions. I think that's the future of Iran. It's a good future, by the way. I personally, you and I have had this talk before. I think that's the future for Iran. I think the future isn't militancy, isn't aggression. I think the future is, a decisive pivot to the East. Now, your president's going to have to stop being in love with the West, and your foreign minister is going to have to stop being in love with the West, and a lot of Iranians are going to have to start falling out of love with the West. I don't mean to hate us, but we're not the solution. We're the problem, especially as long as you have Europe the way it is and the United States the way it is. It's fanciful thinking to imagine in the near future a United States willing to do trade with Iran on an equitable basis. You can't trust us. We're liars. We lie about everything. We can't be trusted. And Europe's the same way. They're dysfunctional liars. The people that have been upfront and honest with the Iranians over time, especially recently, are the Russians and the Chinese. And I am continually flabbergasted that there's still an element within Iran. And I understand it because there's a significant Iranian diaspora here in the West, a lot of connectivity back and forth. But at some point in time, even the Iranian diaspora has to recognize that if you truly love Iran, the solution isn't anything imposed by the West. The solution is Iran pivoting to the global economic future of the world, which is in Asia.
Scott, do you see any sort of false flag operation to sabotage everything? Because we had Naftali Bennett 2 days ago arguing that if the United States leaves the region, that's going to bring a new 9/11 to the United States. And
I don't see that. No, I don't see it at all. There may be an attempt, but the idea that that's going to trigger a repeat of a failed legacy. I know the United States is insane. And Albert Einstein once, or at least been attributed to him, said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So we had a 9/11 that got us involved in 20 years of global war on terrorism that we lost, straight up lost. I know we killed a 57-year-old diabetic. Yay, SEAL Team 6. You guys are so good. You rock, baby. And we got Saddam Hussein hung by the neck until dead. Even though he had nothing to do with 9/11. But we just were humiliated in August of 2021 with the final withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the idea that we've now just lost a war with Iran and we're going to be sucked back in because of some false flag attack, I don't see it. I don't see anybody falling for that.
How do you see, Scott, the future of the United States foreign policy when it comes to Israel and what Israel wants from the United States, which we know that these endless wars, they literally want the United States to fight each and every war in the Middle East and in the region for them. And it seems to me that Donald Trump is just the peak of what could have happened, and it's not going to be the same way as it was, as we've been witnessing with the Trump administration as time goes by in the United States.
Donald Trump's a political animal, and the game is survival. And he needed Miriam Adelson to get elected, so he took her $200 million bribe. And he staffed his team with all the people that Miriam Adelson liked, especially Marco Rubio, and Secretary of State. She wanted him to be vice president. And this team, this golden team of Zionists, have humiliated Donald Trump, humiliated him. And this is a man who, is vindictive as the day is long. If his political legacy is on the line, and the threat that exists that can destroy this legacy comes from this very Zionistic enterprise that he has empowered with Miriam Adelson's money, he'll drop that in a heartbeat. There is no loyalty in Donald Trump, none whatsoever. He has no obligations. It's all about power, and I think you'll see that he's going to divorce himself from the Zionists as quick as possible, and anybody who peeps gets fired. Heads will roll because of this war. Just people need to understand that. And it won't be Donald Trump's head. He's going to take Pete Hegseth is dead man walking. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen soon because the man's just an embarrassment. You saw his testimony before the United States Congress. The guy is, hyped up on, some sort of testosterone-induced cocaine substitute. How dare he speak to the United States Senate in the way he did? I wish I had been a senator because I would have leaped out of the seats and punched him dead in front of the world. I'd go to jail for that gladly because he's a disgrace, this Secretary of War. Why? He doesn't have a right. He works for the American people, and he's up there arrogantly defending illegalities and he's not smart. He's just not a smart person at all. So his head will roll. I think Donald Trump's going to get rid of him as fast as possible. This will be Pete Hegseth's failure. Marco Rubio is a more difficult, aspect. He's a combined national security advisor, Secretary of State. It might be time to pull Rubio in, and relieve him of his national security advisor status, bring in somebody new, and leave Rubio with the Secretary of State, because I think that the dual-hatted also helped get us involved in this war. Scott Bessent, again, is a man who's just brought economic catastrophe. And he's also alienated the United States with China. And it may, we'll see if Trump does have this meeting with Xi Jinping. I don't think Bessent comes out of this meeting looking very well. I think he's a humiliation to the United States. He's a detriment to Donald Trump's legacy. And we may see his head roll too. And now suddenly you're sort of in a Zionist-free zone. You've created a Zionist-free vacuum. And if you staff it with the right people, you're no longer doing Israel's bidding. And I think that's the direction we're heading. Donald Trump is a political animal. 60% of the United States population today views Israel as bad juju. 59% view Netanyahu is bad juju. These are unprecedented numbers, and it's only going to get worse. The American people, unfortunately, aren't more. We don't have a moral compass. I thought we did, but we don't, because we allowed genocide to take place and we allowed this illegal war of aggression to take place. The people aren't against the Iran war because it was the wrong thing to do or it was against the law. They're against it because we lost, and they're feeling the price of the pinch at the pump. Bill Clinton knew this. That's why on his war room in 1992, they had the sticker, "It's the economy, stupid." It is or 1991. It is the economy, stupid. 92, I guess. Got to remember which election year cycle. But that's what wakes America up. We don't have a moral compass. We just understand when it pinches us in the pocketbook. And right now, Israel is pinching us in the pocketbook. And so, goodbye, Israel. And I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a decoupling of the United States from Israel. I don't know how is this sustainable, because now it comes down to a question of how quick Israel collapses. I do think that Israel is going to be experiencing extreme economic difficulty in the not so distant future. And it's going to be so extreme as to promote depopulation. And as people flee Israel and go back to where they belong, which isn't Israel, it demographically becomes almost impossible to sustain the notion of a Jewish homeland. So, that's what I think is the direction we're heading with Israel.
Scott, we had two administrations, the Biden administration forcing Russia to react, to somehow start a new war with the case of Ukraine. And again, the Trump administration doing the same, forcing Iran. Because we know, by the way, the two countries were trying so hard, with Russia in 2021, December 2021, trying to do everything to negotiate with the United States and NATO. And we had the same case with the Iranian case. They were negotiating 2 times while the United States was, somehow, preparing behind the scene to attack, to do a surprise attack. The two countries were forced into these new positions that they're in. And is that going to happen with the case of China as well? Because we had some sort of tariffs on China, but militarily, is that going to happen again?
We have no military power. What are you talking about? What do we got? We had theory. We had the theory that we were the most powerful blue water navy in the world. We had theory that our aircraft carriers would be able to project power in a way that could intimidate China, or the U.S. Air Force could do the same. What the Chinese now know is that the U.S. Navy is a paper tiger. It'll get sunk before it gets anywhere near the Chinese coast, and there's nothing the United States can do to stop that from happening. And they also now know that the air defense umbrella that's currently postured over Taiwan won't work, and that all they have to do is take the Iranian game plan, saturate it with drones on day one, and the Chinese have a whole bunch of drones. Watch the depletion and come in with their sophisticated ballistic missiles, and in 3 days, Taiwan is destroyed. That's the reality right now. And so the United States isn't going to militarily intimidate China. The other reality is that China can shut down the South China Sea and choke off Japan and South Korea at will now. It's no longer a theoretical capacity. We now know the United States has no ability whatsoever to seize control of the South China Seas from China. We also know that China can use proxies to shut down the Strait of Malacca, perhaps Indonesian proxies, another choke point. We're seeing literally the end of an empire, the American empire. The American empire was premised on control of the seas. Our blue water navy, we were everywhere. We can't control anything, and we just proved it. I mean, that's why this Operation Freedom Defeat is such a big deal, because it proves the United States is just as impotent as the day is long. So I don't think we have the same thing. And now we get back to Russia. The thing about Russia that people need to understand is that Vladimir Putin's been playing, in my mind, a brilliant game that happened because he made a mistake. He didn't make a mistake going into Ukraine. The special military operation, he had no choice. He was given no choice. The mistake was believing that Ukraine was agreement capable, because the whole premise of the special military operation was to get Ukraine to the negotiating table quickly. It wasn't to take Kiev. It wasn't to do any of that stuff. It was to put pressure on Ukraine to have a negotiated end. And we saw that immediately after the conflict started. They began negotiating in Gomel in Belarus. After 3 or 4 rounds there, they ran off to Turkey. And within a month or so, they had an agreement. And that would have been the end of it. That would have been a great Russian victory to get the agreement they wanted. But NATO, the United States, and Ukraine turned out to be agreement incapable. And so the war escalated, and Russia's been dealing with that escalation. People forget that when they started the special military operation, the Russians weren't looking at a long-term conflict. And so when you speak about an economic plan to deal with sanctions, they had a plan, but Putin wasn't sure if that plan would work. I mean, people were like, why didn't he mobilize early on? Well, gosh, I don't know why. Because you didn't know if your economy was going to be going through, not just recession, but perhaps depression because of sanctions. There was talk about 20%, constriction of Russia's economy. It turned out to be single digit. And then Russia turned right around and started having a growing economy. But Putin has been managing things. If Putin came in hard, China may have found itself in a little bit more difficult position politically to support that. Putin had to play a game that was premised on, that this wasn't a war, that it was a special military operation linked to legitimacies found under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter in terms of collective self-defense, preemptive in nature, all of which are cognizable claims. The Russians have law on their side, even though the West doesn't like to acknowledge it. But he's had to manage this. He had to manage then the game-changing event where the United States and Western Europe, rather than acknowledging that Russia defeated the Ukrainians and pushing for, a closure through a peace treaty, doubled down and started new lend-lease and started injecting tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military aid. And Russia found itself in a proxy conflict with the collective West. Now, how do you manage that? The first thing Russia had to do is take care of its strategic base. All these people, again, are out there. Russia needed to do this, that, and the other thing. I don't know. Maybe what Russia needed to do is expand their military from 900,000 to 1.6 million so that the other fronts were now taken care of as you draw down resources to the special military operation. So they rebuilt their military, which means they needed to activate defense industry. They're not just applying a war. They're in the process of equipping hundreds of thousands of troops that have brought into existence new military formations. And they've done this. It's been ignored in the West, but they've done it. And now they've taken it up. I think they're going to 2.2 million, expanding even more. Why? Because if you're going to fight the West, you need to have the capacity to do it. They don't want to fight the West. They've avoided this. I think they're getting ready to fight the West. This is the fatal mistake, because as Russia's gotten stronger, Europe's gotten weaker. The Germans are indicative of this. 111 billion euros were allocated for defense military rehabilitation. The Germans don't even know where it went. But it went into a money pit, and the German army's weaker today than they were before they got that money. It's amazing how weak the Germans are. The French are weak. All of Europe's weak. They've got no military capacity at all, and yet they're sitting there flexing muscles that are premised on the notion of America backing them up. Well, that's over thanks to Iran. So now the United States, is in a position where at best they're neutral about Europe, and at worst they're turning their backs on Europe. At the same time that Europe continues to play the escalation game, you have Britain and Germany building drones on behalf of Ukraine, giving them to the Ukrainians so they can strike targets in Russia's strategic depth. And you now have Poland and the Baltic nations providing a corridor through their territory so that drones can get to St. Petersburg. You have the same thing happening where drones are transiting Kazakhstan to get into the Russian strategic depth. And they're starting to have an impact on Russia's energy sector. A strategic impact on Russia's energy sector. This is unsustainable. And so Russia now is going to be compelled to take action. It will be decisive in nature when it occurs. It will not be, giving Europe a chance to match escalation with escalation. They will come in hard. And I think the first thing they're going to do is take out Kiev. Unprecedented. The Russian military said evacuate the city. If you remember, when the Russians unveiled the Oreshnik missile, they said, this missile is horrible, and if we use it, it'll take have the equivalent of a nuclear weapon in terms of the devastation that'll occur. But the Russians said, we would obviously give civilian populations advance notice, and they never did because they never used it against. The Ministry of Defense come out. They didn't say you should think about. They said evacuate. Evacuate. No options. All civilians must evacuate. All diplomatic staff must evacuate. Because if the Ukrainians attack us, we're going to take out Kiev with ballistic missiles. I think we're going to find that Russia has missiles besides Oreshnik, and it's going to be absolutely devastating for Ukraine. But that's what needs to be done. On the battlefield, the Ukrainians, people don't think about how these things happen. But the Ukrainians, of course, now have almost exclusively focused their mobilization on creating drone units. So they want to bring in women for drone units and all this stuff. Where are they getting their drones? These first-person view drones. They're making them at home now, but they're not making them in big factories. What the Ukrainians have done is they've taken these components and housewives are building components. And so they've taken drone manufacturing and they've put it throughout the civilian infrastructure. And as a result, they're able to produce, tens of thousands of drones in a day. And so now these new drone units come in and they've changed the reality of the battlefield. Russia's still advancing, but it's slower. There's the concept of maneuver warfare. You're not maneuvering anywhere with that many drones. Now, Russia has a counter for it. They've created a unit called Rubicon. And Rubicon, I think they were 5,000, might be 15,000 strong now. Specialist counter drone capabilities. So when the Ukrainians seek to, overlay their new drone capacity on the battlefield to change the dynamic, Rubicon comes in and starts killing everybody. And eventually they drive them back. But in the meantime, they've made life hell for Russian soldiers. The Russians can't have the amount of maneuver capacity up front because the drones are taking it out. So the Russians are compelled to thin their lines. They have a handful of men at the front line who are able to hide and avoid these drones, but that creates opportunities for Ukrainians to counterattack. And so they counterattack, they seize some territory that's designed to be seized. The Russians built this in. Then the Russians bring in Rubicon and their own maneuver capability and push the Ukrainians back and kill a lot of people. But it's created a different dynamic that people in the West are saying, oh, the Ukrainians have fought the Russians to a standstill. No, they haven't, because they're losing men at an unsustainable level. But, we've got this taking place. The Russians now recognize, again, one of the things that Vladimir Putin has avoided is taking casualties. But I think the Russians will recognize that at the moment you decapitate Ukrainian leadership, you have to come in and go for the kill on the battlefield. And I think you're going to see the kind of decisive push that hasn't happened because the Russians are going to be willing to absorb the casualties to break through the drone zone and then kill everybody. So I think, we're looking at a very decisive summer coming up, the summer of 2026, and that the United States is going to let this happen because the United States blames Zelensky for the deadlock. And the United States is also embittered about Europe and how they've sustained a war and prevented peace from happening. So I think we're at a state right now that the United States will acknowledge that Europe has, become involved in this conflict to an extent that's unjustifiable, and that Russia has every right to defend itself. And the United States will give Russia a window of opportunity to inflict maximum damage and bring an end to this conflict. It won't be the United States working with Europe to come up with a deal that puts Russia in a bad place. It'll be the strategic defeat of Europe and Ukraine, and the United States sitting back there going, you brought it on yourselves. The war needs to end on terms acceptable to Russia. And in exchange for that, Russia will help bring an end to the conflict with Iran. I think Russia will play a very important role in the nuclear side, but also in the finance side, the lifting of sanctions, because Russia will offer Iran incentives not to insist on, the United States rewriting this legal code, because that's not going to happen.
So do you see at the end of the war in Ukraine, are they going to have Odessa or they're going to lose Odessa? Ukrainians, I'm talking about. Because it's so important.
It's a tough one, because emotionally, I think the Russians won Odessa. Emotionally, strategically, it depends. It depends what happens. Look, we'll know in a couple of days. We'll know on May 10th or 11th if Ukraine exists as a modern nation state. As I said, I pray that they attack Russia on May 9th. I pray they do, because that solves everything. Because I think people in Europe are thinking Russia's bluffing. I don't think Russia's bluffing. And I think that'll be the end of Zelensky, the end of the Ukrainian government. The attack will be so devastating, it'll break the will of Ukraine to fight. And when that happens, you'll see a collapse at the front. And if Russia has indeed created the reserves that some people say, there may be the ability to exploit that collapse and make a push and resolve the Odessa issue. You can resolve Odessa not by seizing the city, but by surrounding the city, cutting the city off. And then as part of the peace is that Russia has given the city. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to play out, because it's a problem fraught with political consequence. It depends on how successful Russia is in this potential push. But I say friends. I'm friendly with. I can say friends with Andrei Yelnitsky. I like the guy, and I think he likes me, so we can call ourselves friends. Sergei Karaganov, we've met and talked. I respect him. I don't know if I'm up in his friend. I don't think I'm in his circle of trust yet, but I listen to the guy, and he's influential. These people have always had a relatively hard line, but it's always been a hard line tempered by political reality. But I think there's a growing recognition that the political reality has changed. You can no longer talk about Russian-European relations using data that's 2 years old. And that's what everybody, including myself, has been doing. I've been, talking about, how Russia relates with Europe and NATO using, 2024 as the benchmark. Things have changed strategically. The harm that's being done to the Russian economy by Ukrainian long-range drone strikes has liberated the Pentagon in many ways, because again, a lot of decisions aren't made because there's alternatives, at least in theory. There are no alternatives now. For this to continue will bring about, potentially fatal harm to Russia. So Russia has no choice. And Karaganov is talking about that. So I honestly believe that we're going to see some very decisive action very soon. The Russia's been preparing for this. And when it happens, it will shock the hell out of everybody. It will be shocking what happens to Kiev. It'll be shocking what happens to some European targets as well. Pro hint, if you're producing drone parts for the Flamingo 5, you might want to not show up for work ever again, because that factory is probably going to disappear. Whether that factory is in the United Kingdom, in Denmark, in Germany, it's going to go, as it should. And then Russia's going to dare Europe to do anything about it. And Russia, believe me, if they make this decision, then Russia's ready to take it to the next level. Europe's not. I don't think Europe's ready to commit nuclear suicide. But when you confront Russia with crises of existential proportions, Russia will respond accordingly. And that's the stupidity of what the Ukrainians and their British and German allies have been doing, not recognizing the reality of Ukraine's inevitable defeat, trying to create a situation that gives them temporary propaganda points. We're hurting the Russians. Yes, you are. And now you're going to find out what happens when you hurt the Russians. And it'll be fatal for Ukraine. I'm not unhappy about that. I'm sorry for the Ukrainian people, but hey, we're 4+ years into a war that you're governed by Banderas, Ukrainian Nazi thugs, and you're doing nothing about it. You're watching your men get dragged off, and you're doing nothing about it. You don't have the gumption to rise up and take matters into your own hands. So you have lost the right to exist as a modern nation state, and so Russia will terminate Ukraine. I personally believe that is what's going to happen. It will be the war that had Russia fought it, because maybe I'm overly sensitive to this, but everybody's like, Scott, you said the war was going to be over in a week. It would have been had Russia gone to war. That's what everybody forgets. Russia didn't go to war. I thought they were going to war. Did you think they were going to war? I think most people thought they were going to war. When they came across, we're like, that's a lot of tanks. Russia's going to war. But they weren't. It was a special military operation, which confused us because we had never heard that term before. I've been studying Russian military art forever. I didn't know what a special military operation was. I found out. And then you realize the genius of what the Russians were doing, trying to get them to the negotiating table, and you realized it was working. So their plan worked. What they didn't factor in to account was the fact that the West is agreement incapable. And the West was seeking the permanent demise of Russia. You had, remember, Lloyd Austin. We want to destroy Russia. Biden, kill Putin. It took Russia. I mean, because those were statements made in the summer of 2022. It's taken Russia 4 years to finally recognize that those threats were serious. And that's the ultimate objective of Europe, is to kill Russia. So now that you've told Russia you want to kill them, don't be surprised when Russia kills you first. And I think that's the direction we're heading.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you. And if I could just make a quick statement.
Go ahead.
As I said, a lot of analysis that's going on today about Russia is founded in data that's more than 2 years old. In 2023, 2024, I took some very serious trips into Russia where I visited 16 cities. I didn't just simply go to Moscow and St. Petersburg. I went everywhere, including the special military operation. And, I got to interview 3 of the 5 governors that are involved in this, and meet military leaders and meet the people and talk. And that shaped my perception of Russian reality. Yes, I've gone back 4 times since then, but those trips have been limited to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and you get caught up in the political bubble of those 2 cities. It's time to go and refresh the database. And I will be going back to Russia for a significant trip to refresh the database, and so that I can update the Russian reality, not just for myself, but for you. I mean, wouldn't you like it if I came on and talked to you that I was not relying on a 2024 database, but I was going with a 2026 database? And so if people think there's value to this, understand I'm an independent journalist. I can only do this with the support of you. Go to scottritter.com. It's my website. You'll get to the Substack. The Substack's free, by the way. You can subscribe for free and gain access to everything. But if you subscribe to the Substack, you're paying my salary. That means that you're paying the electric bill here. You're putting a roof over my head. You're paying for the food that feeds my dogs so they can bark in the middle of a podcast. That's the salary aspect of it. The trips are funded by donations, and there's a donation button there.